Howdy all of you delicious people, I'm here today to review Demolition Man, a 1993 movie that is to masquerade itself as a 1996 film, and then again it does it to masquerade itself to a 2032 movie. So, I guess the things that I have to go on and be either fascinated by or to kind of clear up here from Demolition Man is, of course, the one question that we are to realize by the end of this movie is, how do the three seashells work? Come to find out, we have Sylvester Stallone himself, who at some point was to go on and answer this question. And so he answers it by stating that imagine chopsticks and let your mind wander, and that's how he just kind of answers the question. And so I'm like, well, if that's good enough for a Sylvester Stallone answer, that's good enough for me. I think there is even somebody online who is to actually really go in and show visuals of how that all really is to be a thing. And I was like, wow, like that is really just something I did not need to see in my life, but hey, I saw it anyways. I then was to also find out, because I guess I had saw a non-American release version of this film, that in America, you of course would go on and find out that the last restaurant that exists is to be a Taco Bell. And we of course have Stallone, who's like, well, hey, I can really have a burrito right now. Come to find out, in non-American releases of this movie, the last restaurant is to actually be a Pizza Hut. Oddly enough, I was to watch this movie and they dubbed over the word Taco Bell with Pizza Hut, and obviously the dubbing is not that good. You can clearly tell that they're saying Taco Bell. And you could, of course, also see that there were like signs changed and all kinds of stuff. Like, I was like, man, they're really putting forth the money in this film to really give us these two different slices, if we're going to go with the pizza analogy, of two different films. So I thought that was fascinating. So a non-release version, or a released version of this movie, non-America, was to bizarrely be Pizza Hut was the last restaurant. I don't know why, but it is what it is. So let's go on and let's talk about Demolition Man. So this, of course, is a film that, like, in the very beginning of it, seemed like Batman 89 to me. With the music, just kind of with the fight going on, I was like, alright, like, this seems like Batman for some reason. And, like, we have Simon, who's kind of like the Joker character to Stallone's Batman. And so, interestingly enough, we are to get Rob Schneider and Stallone together in this movie. And so, if we were to have not have also seen them both together in Judge Dredd, now we have them here. Yeah, Rob Schneider doesn't really have a brief part in this movie, but still, he does bring in some jokes at certain points of this movie. So, we come to find that John is to mistakenly blow up a building that has a number of people left inside. And John was to go on and do a thermo check and thought that there, of course, was to be no one left in there besides him and Simon. So we have that lead to John's arrest, and then that leaves both John and Simon Phoenix in cryostasis to somehow, through their cryostasis, be getting these rehab programs being put into their bodies. And it seems that Simon's rehab program is something that is to have turned him into a possible monster, which we'll find that line somewhere in the film. So we have Spartan, who is to have to be forcibly de-cryostasis to go on and fight against Simon, because of course we have Lamb that delivers the line of like, well, hey, like, we have an old-fashioned criminal, and so we need an old-fashioned cop. And that is to really just be possibly the tagline of this whole entire film. So, with that also said, we have Huxley, who is Sandra Bullock's character, who of course is to be this person who is living in the 20th century, and we have all these cops that are just kind of giving her flack for her adapting these old-fashioned ways. And come to find out, that actually ends up benefiting her, even though whenever she used to try and desperately come up with some kind of lingo of some past thing, we of course have John, who's like, no, you are to get it wrong consistently, even though at some points she does get pretty close. So we have some kind of fun references within this movie. We have Stallone at one point telling Alfredo to use the Force. We have Simon that goes on and is to get a gun from Rambo. And there is just a bunch of like fun, just kind of little Easter egg things in this movie. And it is just rather fun. So I really enjoy this movie. I hope a lot of people will, if they have never seen this film, finally go on and check it out. And if I haven't gone on and stated it, I will state it now. So the grading of this movie, I would say that it is, I want to say it's like it's a solid, good film, if not getting almost to great easily, because it's just like, it still holds up. It's still a lot of fun. A lot of people could say it's like, well, hey, like, isn't 2032 coming up soon? Yeah, and I get that we're probably not going to be like this drastically different in that time period, but hey, like, anything can happen. So we also have this movie that states in 2010 that there was this big earthquake, and yeah, that never happened either. Like, the earthquake, as they stated. So that never happened, so man, did we just, I guess, dodge that bullet from this movie's prediction. So with that said, let's just go on and let's go into spoilers. Let's go on and kind of break this down a little bit. So with that said, let's go into that double 5 time territory, because it's about that time yet again to, of course, go into spoiler time. It's about that time to spoil this movie. If I didn't go on and state where you can go on and see this film, Culness Goal. There is an app that is to be called Culness Goal, CULNISSGOAL. I know that sounds very weird. I know that sounds like a weird, goofy name for an app, but it works. I was to watch this movie for free, because honestly, right now, currently, Demolition Man is available on like YouTube's and other kind of things for a price. If you have the money, go ahead and spend it. If you already have this movie in your collection somewhere, dust that bad boy off, maybe give it a second look. Maybe it's been a while. Who knows? So with that said, I think it's about that time to just go into spoilers, so let's do that thing. So, in the beginning of this film, we of course have Los Angeles in 1996. Again, a movie that has masqueraded itself as a 1996 film. So, we come to find the Hollywood sign burning down, and we make our way into having John Spartan be in this helicopter, and he is to just like jump off this helicopter tied to this rope to then go on and start shooting some of these bad guys. So we have John that makes his way into this building, now grabbing, interrogating Simon for the information of where are the hostages. Because, of course, Simon is to state that he was to have taken a whole bus of people and is to tell John that it's like, well, yeah, like, nobody ever comes here anymore, and so, but the buses still keep on coming. So Simon is to have taken clear advantage of that. So we have John and we have Simon that are fighting, and so Simon is to consistently not tell John where these hostages are. And John even did a thermo scan, finding that there were no people in this building. So we have Simon, who is to have put gasoline upon the ground and is to have this little torch. So we have Simon that is to take this place and start to burn it down, forcing then John to punch out Simon, grabbing him, running him out of the building as this whole entire building explodes. So John arrests Simon, and so now we have John's captain coming in and like, well, hey, this Demolition Man stuff, like, it's not gonna fly anymore. Like, John, you need to go on and just kind of dial down what you're doing. So we all of a sudden come to find out that like a firefighter ends up kind of breaking up this conversation to say like, well, hey, like, we had found a number of bodies here, and John is like, well, hey, I did thermals before I came in here, and like, there wasn't anybody left. So we have Simon who's telling John, it's like, well, hey, like, you're gonna go down just like I am. So come to find out, John, after all, is to go to prison for 70 years in cryostasis. We have John who is to get his sentence from this warden, and John is to consistently tell him to skip it, skip this, skip that, so on and so forth. So we have John that ends up becoming frozen, and so we then cue the brush off of this in 2032. So we now have Huxley that is going on and driving for her day, and she is to be talking to Warren Smithers and is to ask like, well, hey, how is your day going? And Warren Smithers is like, well, just as good as any normal day. And so Huxley is like, well, like no chaos, no, because Huxley is just so tired of doing what she's doing that she's just desperate for something to just break loose, or for something for her to do besides just kind of drive around and sit in her office all day. So we end up having this exchange from all these people to tell one another to be well. Okay? That seems like an unusual catchphrase, but I guess at some point in 2032, are we going to just tell people to be well a lot? So we have Huxley who's even going on to like self-drive her car. And so I'm like, Huxley is kind of reminding me of Will Smith from iRobot, where he, of course, is to be this more retro guy, and he, of course, doesn't trust the robots or doesn't trust technology. And so Huxley is starting to kind of fit into that, where she's to be a character that is to kind of be more retro, and whenever it seems anyone is to kind of slight her about who she is, it's like, well, hey, that's just me. Like, if you don't like it, then tough crap. So we come to find that Edgar Friendly was to try and graffiti this sign that, of course, was to be the Ethical Plaza. And quickly we have that graffiti kind of wiped off. And so we have Edgar that is desperately telling his people that we need to go on and we need to find food for our people. We quickly end up seeing Jack Black in the background of this. And so, yeah, so Jack Black was in Demolition Man. Barely. But hey, take the credit from which you can get it. So, and I'm kind of curious how Jack Black got, like, Demolition Man. Even though it's a small role, still, it's always that curiosity. So, we have Huxley, who is to make her way into the office and is to be greeted by Irwin, who of course is to be Rob Schneider's character. And then we have Huxley, who's talking to this character that in IMDb is just to be called the Tough Cop. And so Huxley talks to this Tough Cop about this horrible graffiti. And so Huxley was like, well, why wasn't I sent out there? Why wasn't, like, everyone sent out? And we, of course, have Chief George. It's like, well, like, because it was quickly handled. And so we have Chief George that is to talk to Huxley about her behavior. Just realizing that she is starting to set a bad example for a lot of the other cops and doesn't like her retro way of thinking. So we go on and have Huxley leave after talking to the chief. And we have Alfredo that it's like, man, that conversation was really tense. She's like, really? That was tense to you? It's like, well, I guess because for however times you would just kind of see nothing, like, I guess, like the flimsiest scenario would be, I guess, the more built up one, I guess. So we start to have Alfredo, who is talking to Huxley about her office, realizing the Lethal Weapon posters and the weird, goofy cans that pop out snakes. He is to really state that, like, her whole office is to be kind of one of the codes that they want to, of course, get rid of. Because they want to go on and get rid of everything in this movie. Everything that seems to be deemed unhealthy in these people's eyes were something that they, of course, had gotten rid of, like cigarettes or alcohol or even meat, it seems, was to be a thing that they got rid of because it was deemed unhealthy. To the point of even John asking for salt when they were at Taco Bell, and the salt, of course, wasn't there either because, again, it was illegal. So I was like, all right, like, this is weird. This is interesting. I'm liking some of this. So we have Huxley who's like, man, what I wouldn't give for some action right now. Maybe she's meaning action in a double entendre kind of way. Who knows? So we have Warren Smithers that goes on and is to meet up with Simon Phoenix. And so Warren Smithers is to just, you're like, well, yeah, this is going to be a really brief interaction between Simon because it's like we know where he's going. So we have Warden that is to start to talk here, and Simon is to kind of double over him in Spanish. And we, of course, have Smithers who gets frustrated and is to tell Simon, it's like, well, like, you got anything really to say here? And Simon's like, well, yeah, I think I do. Teddy bear. And then, boom, his shackles are to be unshackled. Simon starts attacking and taking down all of these characters, and then is to rip out the eye of the warden. and then make his way out of this place like it was the easiest thing in the world. So we all of a sudden have the police force that is getting a code of 187. Very confused about what this 187 could be. So we even have, of course, Huxley, who is to need to even look this up. Come to find out, it's an MDK, murder, death, kill. So we come to find this veteran detective, or veteran officer, my bad, Lamb, who is to find out who is to have gone on and done this murder, death, kill, and he's like, oh yeah, I know that guy. That's Simon Phoenix. And we come to find out that for how they're going to try and track Simon down, they figure out what car he, of course, is to be in, and so they track down the car. So we have Simon that is to make his way to a compute kiosk. And we have some guy that is going on and complaining about his life. Like, I don't know about me, kiosk. Like as if this is some kind of weird kiosk therapy. And so Simon grabs the guy and chucks him out of the way. It's like, get your therapy somewhere else. So, not on my screen, buddy. Not on my screen time. So, we all of a sudden have Simon who's typing away at this computer, and we come to find out that Simon is to have one goal, and one goal only, as he is to hear the repeated words of Dr. Raymond tell him, it's like, don't you have something to do? Don't you have someone to kill? As we go on to find that Simon's goal is to kill Dennis Leary. I don't know why, I think Dennis Leary has really good stand-up. If anyone was to have ever gone on and seen Dennis Leary stand-up, it's freaking, like, awesome. I like the bluntness of it. The one bit that he has about him going to this, like, 7-Eleven or something, and he goes in to get coffee, and it's like Maple Nut Crunch or something, and Leary is just like, really? Like, you guys don't have regular and decaf? You have this, like, maple nut crap or whatever? So, like, that whole bit was like, man, this is awesome. Then also he would talk about, like, him, like, at certain points, like, being with his kids, and, like, those were pretty good stuff. Pretty good jokes, too. I like those. So, and how they would go on and, like, ruin his car, and he would just be like, yeah, go on, just ruin my car, I'm just gonna sit on this grass, and anyways, going too long about it. So, we have, of course, Edgar, Edgar. We have Simon that is to have the cops arrive, and they have never really faced this kind of threat before, so we have the cops who's getting this kind of little screen thing, and they're like, well, like, what should I do, screen? And so it's like telling them step by step of what to do, and telling them to, like, have your hands, or get down to the ground and put your hands behind your back, and sort of, and we have this officer that repeats this nonsense, and Simon is like, huh? Alright, okay. So, Simon is to completely ignore him and just kind of do what he was doing on the computer. So, we have the guy who repeats it, or else, and he's like, or else? Alright. So, he hacks in the computer, and then all of a sudden, one of the cops ends up getting electrocuted off to the side. And so Simon starts just decking all of these cops. And then he goes on to explode one of the police cars and then runs off. And he also takes the camera and is to do this kind of in the home of the brave, and does all this goofy stuff. So we have, of course, Edwin that is to make the joke about, like, hey, we're police officers. We're not trained for this. We're not trained to respond to this. So we have Simon that goes on to meet with Dr. Raymond as both Raymond and Bob are just kind of making their way through town. And so Simon is to want to go on and shoot Raymond, but he can't. And so we, of course, have Raymond that is to tell Simon, it's like, well, hey, like, haven't you been hearing something repeating over and over and over again within your brain? Like, don't you have something to do? Don't you have someone to kill? And we're like, oh, okay, so that's where that voice comes from. All right. So, like, Raymond's having a little bit of a plan for himself. So, we then have Raymond, who is talking to this, like, these chairmen that are, like, literally just people on chairs that, like, rotate. And so we have Raymond who is talking about Friendly and how he is a threat that needs to be eliminated and so on and so forth. And so Bob starts talking about Simon. And so we, of course, have Raymond that is to talk to Chief George about Simon to see, like, what they're going to do about it. So we, of course, have Raymond that is to tell, like, the chief to, like, do whatever means necessary to obtain this person. And so we have the chief who's like, well, yeah, like, go on by any means. So we have Lamb that is to talk about the Demolition Man, John Spartan. And so they're to look into this cop, and it's like, well, yeah, he has, like, a record of 1,000 arrests. So Chief George is this state, it's like, well, no, he's an animal. He's a muscle-bound, grotesque, and all this other things. Like, it seems that they go on and they consistently call John Spartan, like, a caveman, or just, like, the weirdest, goofiest crap. And you would have thought, like, John would almost be treated like Captain America in a way when Captain America came out. It's like, oh, you're a man out of time and all these things. So, like, we could almost have John Spartan be like Captain America in a way, but Captain America who can consistently swear, where, of course, Captain America would not. Because, of course, he would be kind of like the Leave It to Beaver people that we have in this film. So John, of course, had to be the opposite. So we have Lamb that states, like, well, hey, like, the tagline of the movie, like, we have a old-fashioned crook, so we need an old-fashioned cop. So we have a sequence of John getting revived that is to, of course, take way too long. But so anyways, we go on to now have Alfredo that is telling Huxley, it's like, well, hey, it's not enough that you collect the 90s. Now you need to actually bring the 90s back to life. And so we go on to have John, like, talk about his wife. And so we come to find out that Huxley is to do a kind of follow-up. It's like, well, yeah, like, your wife died in an earthquake, the earthquake of 2010. And So we have Chief George who's like, well, hey, like, we're not here for family reunions. Like, I'm sorry if you want an update, but we could care less. So they have to tell him that Simon has escaped, and he's like, really? All right, okay. I guess that's why I'm here. So we, of course, have John that is asked for a cigarette, and that's when they tell him a bunch of stuff that is unhealthy is illegal. So pregnancy is even illegal without a certain license. So yeah, like, no, just gaboing da boing, you know what I'm saying? No gabang da bang. If you no horizontal mumbo or whatever. No bumping uglies. Sadly enough, in this world. So we go on to, of course, have John, who's to use the can or crapper or whatever, and he is to, of course, go on and go to the officers of like, well, hey, like, I want to let you guys know that you guys, like, don't have any toilet paper. It's like, well, no, we don't have toilet paper at all, because, like, that's a thing that they used to do. Now we don't do toilet paper. And here's my question. How do you go on and, like, consistently, you must have had to, like, non-stop stock those 3 seashells. Wouldn't you spend a crap ton of money on 3 seashells than you would toilet paper? It's just my thought. Just me thinking. So, we go on to have Rob Schneider's character Irwin that laughs at the fact of like, oh, he doesn't understand the 3 seashells. So, we have John that meets up with Lamb. It's like, oh my god, like, you were a rookie pilot. And Lamb is like, well, yeah, like, but they grounded me. And he's like, it had to happen sometime. So we all of a sudden have John who starts cussing. And we start to hear this violation machine popping out these tickets. And so John is to realize, oh, wait, I can go on and just start cussing and getting all this paper to use as toilet paper. So John just starts cussing like a sailor, and is to get all these violation pieces of paper, and he's like, okay guys, I'll be back in a couple minutes. So we go on to have John find out that it seems that John was like Simon to not be coded, because in this future they would go on and they would code everybody to find out where they all are. And so as soon as John was to get dethawed, he was to immediately get coded on his hand, and so John is consistently rubbing on it. And so we had John that goes on and tells the chief, it's like, well, why don't you just put a leash up my butt? So John knows where Simon is going to go next, and it's really just to get a gun. Because when Simon was at that kiosk, he starts looking into it, and they are to, like, state what a gun is or what it used to be. It also used to be a pistol. And John was like, well, yeah, like, where are the guns? So we, of course, have Chief George that knows one place and one place only that a gun would even be held, and that, of course, would be the San Angeles Museum of History. So guns, I guess, are so done away with that we have a whole museum to just store them at, which seems to be the most unsafe place to hold a huge amount of guns at. So Spartan, of course, can't drive this car, and we have him forced to listen to these goofy old commercial jingles as a radio station. And we, of course, have Simon that is breaking through this museum's display wall with a man who is to have a boggle question for Simon. So we have Simon that is to go on and be like, well, hey, like, how much do you weigh? And bashes him through this this window. Because when Simon tries to kick it or tries to punch it, yeah, it doesn't quite work. So we have, of course, Simon that starts to make his way through all of these guns. He's like, well, wait a minute, like, this is the future, right? Where are the phaser guns at? I would assume it would have been laser guns, but I guess he said phaser. But anyways. So we then go on to have Simon that is to use the Rambo reference and to get this bag. So we have John, Alfredo, and Huxley that make their way to this museum, and come to find out the only weapon that these police have is this glow rod. And John's like, well, does it really work? And the guy's like, well, yeah. And so John just zaps somebody and he falls over. It's like, well, I guess it does. So John, of course, is to witness that Alfredo is to try and go on and use this kind of hand link thing to figure out what his steps are to do next. And so John takes that and chucks it, and he's like, Alfredo, use the force. So we immediately have Huxley, who's demand the building's intel and where every bit of where they can go is, and she wanted it 90 seconds ago. And we, of course, have John, who's like, I like the moxie of this girl. So we have John, who meets up with Simon, and it seems that he's on his own. We have a pretty good exchange when they finally meet together in this film and fight it out in 2032, because of course they had the other fight in 96. So there are some pretty good jokes here. There's some pretty good just banter, but either way. So we have them continue to fight, and they both fall through this glass that is to make their way into this kind of old-fashioned exhibit where we have this old-fashioned car and we have this kind of tube TV, which of course is to be even old-fashioned now for 2032, which is supposedly to be this movie. But anyways, so with that said, we have, of course, Simon using his phaser gun that finally needs to have this charge, and he makes this kind of joke about, like, well, hey, where are the batteries? So Simon and John fight together in this retro exhibit, and so Bob and Dr. Raymond find Simon, and so we then have Raymond that goes on to also meet John and talks about whacking. I think there might have been a scene that I got a little bit confused, or either way, I think there might have been a time when I got a little ahead of myself, because I think the scene where I mentioned before, it happens later, or it happens right here, and I got ahead of myself a little bit, because I was thinking about the scene where Simon meets Raymond, but actually it was just Simon who was to just hear Raymond's voice. Something along those lines. Got a little bit confused, on my bad. So we go on and have Chief George then introduces John to Raymond. And so that's, of course, when we have the whole Taco Bell Pizza Hut thing. And so we have John, who's to go with Huxley to Pizza Taco. Uh, I don't know. It's either one, either version of this movie. It's Taco Bell. I'm gonna go with Taco Bell. No offense, other people of the world. So we have John find out that Arnold Schwarzenegger has his presidential library, and that Simon, while John is making his way to Taco Bell, Simon is to make his way into a sewer to try and find Friendly. So we come to find a Pizza Hut sign, or in an alternate universe, Taco Bell. So we have them go on and have John was like, man, I'm pretty hungry, and he sees this little tiny bits of food, and he's like, wow, okay, this really sucks. Like, I can't wait to eat that rat burger later. So we have John that is to tell Bob, it's like, well, hey, could you pass me the salt? And again, salt is illegal. So we of course have Raymond, who is to talk about how things were between the time that John was away, stating that at one point there was to be this kind of fear zone, and how John had to kind of take them out of that fear and bring them into the light, I guess. So we go on to have John talk about his time in cryostasis, and how he wished that that they would have just killed him. It would have been more humane, as he had of course seen his wife beating on this ice, and talked about burning buildings and all kinds of things. So we have Spartan, who is to start to notice something. He's like, hey, it seems like something's going on outside. And Huxley is to be like, well, wait, why are you leaving? And he's like, well, just call it a hunch. So we find Friendly, who is desperately trying to go on and scavenge for food and steal from this Taco Bell Pizza Hut. And so John tries to stop them, really going on and taking out every one of these characters. And so we have to depict, bizarrely, hobos as criminals in this film for whatever reason. And because I guess if salt is legal, maybe being a homeless person is illegal also. I don't know why that is a thing in this movie, but I guess it is. So we have John that goes on and state that he didn't really want to go after Edgar and his people, because they were just looking for food. They weren't trying to steal money. They were just kind of looking for a place to eat. So we have John and Huxley that leave Taco Bell. They never really ate anything, I guess. So we have John that is to start to talk about his daughter, and how John is to realize that he's probably been out of the picture for his daughter for so long that there may not be a way for him to reconnect with her. And Huxley is like, well, I can do a search, and John's like, no, I don't want to know. So we have Huxley that gives John a disc, and Huxley's like, why did you want this disc? And we would of course have John who's like, well, it's another one of my hunches. So we have Raymond that meets up with Simon, and we of course have Simon, who is to have reprogrammed the room of which that Raymond is in, to, instead of having the light go on and off, we have Simon that is to have the trigger word of illuminate and deilluminate. So we have Simon who is to give Raymond a list of prisoners that he wants Raymond to free, and we of course have Raymond that is to guarantee Simon that once Simon does do his job, that we of course will have John be put back in the freezer and Simon can do whatever he wants. Bringing this world possibly again back into chaos, who knows? So we have Huxley that is to leave with John to eventually tell John that rooms are to be voice activated. Kind of, I guess, like Star Trek would eventually be at certain points where you, of course, would have certain Star Trek people saying, like, well, hey, could you dim the lights 30%? And the room would do so. But eventually, I think they would also have to, like, ask the computer to do something. But so, we have Huxley that is to talk to John, and is like, well, you know what? Like, with violence, there is also, like, love, also with that. So, Huxley is kind of being around the bush to just state, it's like, well, hey, like, do you want to go on and, do you want to, bump uglies? Do the horizontal mongo? You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to tiptoe around and do creative words here. So we have Stallone that's like, yeah, I wouldn't mind. So we come to find that Huxley is to give John this headset, and he's like, okay, whatever this is. So they put both of these on, and they all of a sudden get into their VR11. And John is like, and then he just starts to disconnect from it. And Huxley's like, what happened? And John's like, well, I didn't even touch you yet. And she's like, well, that's not how the future is. And because John wants to do it the old-fashioned way, with fluid exchanges. And so we, of course, have Huxley that is stated, it's like, well, there were so many diseases and illnesses that all came from fluid exchanges, so they just kind of made that illegal. And we, of course, have John who would ask about, like, well, like, then how do people have babies? And then Huxley goes on to even explain that. So we have John that goes back to his room as he is to even try to push Huxley to kiss, and she's like, no. So John goes back into his room and is to find his beret, and is to also find his behavioral engineering thing, which is to be this thing of yarn. And so we have John that looks into this footage and realizes that Simon could not go on and kill Raymond even though he had him dead to rights. So there's something with that. There's something there. So the following day, we have John who is to give Huxley a sweater and is to apologize about last night. So Huxley is to really appreciate the gift, and John's like, like, I don't know what it is. Like all of a sudden I see like a thing of yarn and I'm just kind of knitting away. I don't get it. And so we have Huxley that goes on to explain, it's like, well, that's your rehab program. And he's like, wait a minute, so I'm like a seamstress? I'm a tailor? Really? So we have Huxley that looks into Simon's rehab program because he's 3 times stronger than when he went into prison, and it seems that he knows all this stuff. He's more like combat skilled and all kinds of things. And so we have Huxley looking it up to realize that Simon was to have had a improper rehab program, and it looks at all these like really seemingly illegal stuff. And so we of course have John, who's like, well, hey, like, who was to do all this programming for these rehabs? And come to find out, it would be Raymond himself. So John goes on to try and question Raymond, which just kind of leads to nowhere, to really just have John warning Raymond that it's like, well, hey, like, you are to not really understand like what you've unleashed out in the world. Like, he's just kind of warning Raymond that Simon will at some point outsmart even Raymond, and he will. So John is now forced to go into the sewers himself to find possibly Simon, or to find Friendly, the target of which that Simon is going after. So they go into the sewers to make their way into the Ninja Turtles' lair. Wouldn't that be sweet, right? So we have this underground living arrangement with all of these homeless people, and we all of a sudden have John, who spots this person grilling, and he's like, oh my god, there's meat on there. And so John is like, I want that burger, and hey, if you have a beer, I'd love that too. So John starts eating this burger and get this beer, and he's like, yeah, this is great. And we of course have Huxley that is tell John, it's like, don't ask them where they got the meat from. John's like, what are you talking about? And Huxley's like, do you see any cows around here? And so John asks what the burger, of course, was, as he was to have given Huxley's watch in order to get this burger, and come to find out this is a rat burger. And so he's like, best burger I've had all day. So we have John and Huxley that are to make their way to find this certain car, of which that I'm not going to go on and get into details of what that actually was. And so then that leads them to Friendly with a gun upon their head. And so they make their way to talk to Edgar. And so they're starting to realize that Edgar is to equal or mean rebellion. That we, of course, have Edgar that is to desperately want cholesterol, to walk around town without his clothes on, rubbing jelly all over himself, or jello all over himself. And we have, of course, Edgar that wants to live the American dream and doesn't want anybody to stop him from doing that. So it's either you go on and you live down there and you probably starve to death, but you get to live the life that you want, or you're forced to live the life of which that is to be the other society, that is to be under Raymond's control. So we have Simon that is to talk to the criminals that had gotten unthawed, and is to talk about 2032. So, like, man, it's really interesting how we go on and had John, who they really went in depth about how he uncryoed, but then we had, like, Simon, who's to kind of quickly, like, already be shown out of his cube, or out of his block of ice, and the other ones, they kind of quickly just kind of show them they're there. So they really, I guess, just had the money to just spend on this like whole like uncryo thing, which I think they would jokingly redo at some point in the Austin Powers movie when he gets uncryoed. So we have Simon updating these guys on what is to be now 2032. And so John is to make Edgar aware about Simon and how he's gunning for him. And Edgar's like, really? Like, for me, of all people? Edgar is stating that. So, we have Simon that is to make his way into the sewer and is to bring a lot of his merry men to start shooting up the place. So, we have Simon that eventually is to leave this sewer to then make his way to this cop car. We also have Huxley and John that are to take this elevator that goes that breaks through a car dealership's floor, and then they drive their way through this showroom, and we then have this car chase that of course goes on. And so we have John that of course is to be driving this car, and then he lets Huxley drive the car. Huxley doesn't really know how to drive this car, so she's like, oh, like, this is the gas, right? And so she starts driving, and so, like, at first she doesn't understand what she's doing, but then she starts to understand. So we have Simon who gets on top of this car and then jumps to Simon's. And we, of course, have Simon who is to emergency open these doors, and so he starts fighting off John here. So once they start wrestling kind of in this car almost, we have Simon that goes on to explain John that the bodies that had been in this building were already dead before that whole explosion. Kind of writing off that John was to have never had like killed those people, because so he didn't do that crime, but he still had to forcibly do the time. If I don't know if there was a way to even like prove any of that, because now like I think we could just have John who's like, well, like I would just have to have taken Simon's word for it because he's the only one really left alive. So we have John that throws Simon out of the car, and then he loses control of the car as he can't self-drive it or whatever. So he crashes the car, and all of a sudden security foam surrounds it to protect him from this accident. And so Huxley goes on and retrieves Spartan to then go on and have them realize that, like, well, hey, what was this whole, like, foam that came up? And they're like, oh, it's security foam. So Chief George goes on and is to do yet another insult, calling John a caveman. So we have Edgar that makes his way to meet up with John. And so now John and Edgar are to join forces to go up against Simon. And we also have Alfredo that is to be in his armor. So the chief even wants to arrest John, and both of them are to be like, like, you know what, like, you can just kind of just shut up, chief. Like, we're just going to go on and we're going to solve this case for you and make you happy. So even Huxley is to state that that the chief can take this job and shovel it. He's like, shovel it? Close enough. All right. So Simon talks to Raymond, and we have, of course, Jesse Ventura that goes on to kill Raymond, because of course none of these other prisoners are to be hypnotized like Simon was. And so you can tell that this was Simon's plan all along, especially getting these other prisoners free. So Bob is to plead for his life and say, like, well, hey, like, I can really help you out, and like, it can really benefit you. And Simon's like, oh, okay, yeah, all right. So Bob, of course, alerts Simon of John and Huxley and the police just making their way in. So we have John and Huxley that is to fight off Simon's men, and we even have Huxley who's to shoot and kill somebody. Like, oh my god, I just shot somebody. And John is like, well, yeah, but it had to be done. So we have John and Huxley that find Raymond dead, and John is like, well, like, you guys are going to be a lot better off for it. And they're starting to realize that every single one of the prisoners are all to be released and to be freed, and so they're realizing that they have to kind of stop that from happening. So we have Simon that is to shoot and kill a bunch of cryo guys, and John is to crash through this gate with this car. So I guess Huxley was to have gone on and gotten knocked out. If I didn't state that, that's why she's not here, because we of course have John that is to kind of zap Huxley and knock her out. If I didn't go on and explain that, so I feel that that needs to have gotten explained. So we next have John that gets grabbed by a crane. Simon is to try and fire a cryo weapon, but he realizes it doesn't work as well as he wants it to, so he bashes it against something for this to go on and have this weapon blast even harder. And Simon is to just get frustrated how nothing seems to work to defeat John. So we get further to just have John, who is to realize that he can take this one piece of equipment and bash it onto the ground and freeze everything that, of course, is to be around them. And then John is to grab this crane that is kind of just circling around anyways. So we come to find that Simon is to become frozen, and that, of course, is when John is to give the heads up line and break off Simon's head from the rest of his body, killing him. So the next thing that happens is that John runs out of this building to meet up with Chief George and is to want an update of what had all happened. John goes on and explains what all had happened, and that basically, like, the cryo prison is toast. And so Chief George is like, well, like, how will we live? And so we, of course, have John who states, like, well, hey, like if the police and Edgar, if you guys can figure out a way to just kind of work together in harmony, like Chief, you can get a little bit more dirty, and like Edgar, you can clean up a bit, and it just kind of meets somewhere in the middle. And we're naturally assuming that Edgar at some point is going to become a politician and probably going to be running this town, is what we would naturally assume. So Bob is all willing to go on and work with Edgar, and Edgar is to tell Bob, it's like, well, hey, like, with the hair, like, pick a color. and all this crap. So John goes on to kiss Huxley, and that, of course, is to wrap up this film. And so with that said, I'm going to wrap up myself out of here, as I've talked for an hour. I apologize, but hey, that's the review for you. Let me know in the comments below how you felt about Demolition Man, if you were to ever have checked out this movie at some point. It's a fun action movie. I really did just, like, enjoy it. I get that this movie may not hold up really at some point, because it's just a lot of references from stuff of movies and whichever that, like, aren't really all that relevant now and whatever. But either way, I think it's about that time to say for me to just get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.